Okay.
Yeah, okay, good. Thanks, Mike. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our monthly NCyTE member meeting. And we have, like Mike said, a double header today. And so we're going to have Danielle Santos. She's the Communications and Operations and the lead international engagement officer for the NIST. And she's going to talk about the RAMPS funding, and then we'll have Michael Prebil and Karen Wetzel from NICE, and they're going to talk about the new framework, the new version of the framework, and the components that are made up in that version. So I'm going to turn this over to Daniela, and I'll be watching the chat. So if you want me to interrupt you, or if you just want to wait to the end, it's up to you, Daniela.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stephen. And I'm happy to be interrupted by questions. So if any do come up, just please let me know. Let's get the slides up here. So thanks for having me again, and I'm happy to share with you about a grant program we have running right now called RAMPS. It has a longer name, Regional Alliances and Multi-Stakeholder Partnerships to Stimulate Cybersecurity Education and Workforce Development. But moving forward, we'll just call it RAMPS here. And we are accepting applications now. So I think this presentation is timely. To give a kind of a brief background on what RAMPS actually is, as the name states, it's really focused on these regional multi-stakeholder partnerships. So one of the things we want to highlight in the need for cybersecurity talent is that there are different needs depending on where you're at regionally across the country. And so the example being, for instance, in New York, there might be a lot more cybersecurity financial services kind of related jobs. In the middle of the US, there might be more operational technology, cybersecurity needs, if you think about farming equipment and things that are much different than systems that run financial operations. So if you start thinking about the different workforce needs that are needed across the country, we really wanted to highlight that we can create efforts to keep talent where talent is needed. So that's what this grant program really aims at doing, is building up those local pipelines of skills and talent to be able to meet the needs of the workforce that's there in a local area. Of course, since this is a grant opportunity coming from the NICE program office, we want to make sure that these grants are aligning with things like the NICE strategic plan that focuses on things like career discovery and modernizing cybersecurity talent management, transforming the way cybersecurity is taught and learned. But in addition to that, since NICE is at NIST, which is a Department of Commerce agency, we also want to highlight different Department of Commerce principles. The Department of Commerce actually has a strategic plan that talks about work in regional areas, highlighting regional needs. They also have principles for highly effective workforce investment and good jobs principles, which talk about things like adequate pay for jobs, diversity and equity and inclusion in hiring practices, and many other things like that. So part of these grants are going to be supporting those principles and strategies as well. As I did mention, it's a current opportunity for funding, so we're accepting applications. Any non-federal entity can apply. So whether it's a nonprofit, it's an academic institution, it can be a for-profit organization, all eligible to apply. Even state organizations are eligible as long as they're not federal entities. And the deadline will be next month, May 24th. I think either Mike or Stephen had mentioned that we did do a longer workshop about this RAMPS program. So we will have a recording of that online. It should be online any day now. And that really goes into everything about this grant program. It goes into how to apply on grants.gov if you haven't done that before, the different things to look out for. So if you're really interested in learning more about that, I would encourage you to check back on our website for that recording, as well as an FAQ that we have up there. But I'll kind of give us the 10-foot view here today. So a little bit of background, we actually did just award 18 grants supporting ramps 2 weeks ago. And here's kind of a map showing where those 18 grants fall. And they're across 16 different states here. So if you're interested in kind of seeing examples of what we're currently funding, that's available online. And then we actually, back in 2016, ran a pilot of the RAMPS program. At the time, we were only able to fund 5 different projects here. So you can kind of see where those projects were. But more importantly, those 5 projects published a report on kind of the roadmap for how they created their RAMPS program, lessons learned, and kind of tips for future RAMPS programs. So again, if you're interested in applying, I would definitely recommend checking this report out. There are things in this report, even like example metrics that you can use for your program, because as you'll see, I think in one of the next slides, metrics of success are a primary component of what we want to see come out of these RAMPS programs. So here just briefly, and I'll wrap up really quickly here, but to further describe what we're looking for in these RAMPS projects, again, they must align to some of these strategies and principles that come from the NICE Program Office and the Department of Commerce. We are very interested in supporting diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility as part of these. So thinking about not only the regional diversity and types of jobs that we're trying to fill in the cybersecurity workforce, but whether it's ethnic or skill backgrounds, reaching not only young students, but also career changers, those kinds of things are what we're looking for here. They do need to be employer-led and community-focused. So when I say employer-led, it doesn't mean that the employer needs to be the applicant. What this is really referring to is that we want to make sure that the employers are defining the jobs that are needed in that community, and that the learning, the skills we're building, the talent we're building to meet those jobs are really going to meet the jobs that the employer is saying that they have. So we can have that seamless pipeline of skills into workforce. I mentioned the NICE strategic plan, also supporting the NICE framework. So we want to make sure that these programs are helping to advance the NICE framework, whether it be through the training or curriculum that's developed through the program, or through the employer side. It's the way that talent is being hired and brought on board or advanced through their careers. And then, of course, back to the local needs of the economy, we want to make sure that we are learning about what those regional areas actually need for talent. So in some cases, this looks like referencing Cyberseek, which if you haven't heard of Cyberseek before, it's a heat map of sorts that shows where supply and demand of cybersecurity talent is across the US. But it also could be things like local assessments to figure out what kinds of jobs are open, talking to local businesses to ask them what kinds of skills they need. A big part of the RAMPS program is not only just the education and learning part, but also the work-based learning part. So we want to see in these programs how we might create those pipelines of learning to hands-on, on-the-job learning through things like internships, apprenticeships, and co-op programs. This will be no surprise to this group, but we also want these groups to be working with their local CAEs, ATEs, SFS institutions. I think NCyTE would fall into this, although not a requirement. It would be a great place to start to make sure that we're not recreating any wheels. We want to make sure that if we're looking at regional workforces, we're making sure that we're working with those regional centers that are already doing things to help create talent. And then, as I mentioned, that metrics piece is really important for these. We want to make sure that we can measure the progress and success of the RAMPS programs. So there's some examples there of metrics, but again, if you look back at that other report, there are further examples of what the past RAMPS programs used to measure their success. And then quite possibly the biggest thing I want to emphasize here is that these are intended to be multi-stakeholder. So we want to see through these proposals that there is a plan in place to have multiple organizations involved. There is a requirement that at least one institution of higher education or nonprofit training organization is involved, and at least one employer or owner and operator of critical infrastructure. So at minimum, there's 3 people, right? The applicant, an institution of higher education or nonprofit training, and then the local employer. Of course, we'd love to see more than just the 3 organizations as part of this partnership, but because they are intended to be multi-stakeholder, we want to stress that this is meant to be more than just one person working on the grant, more than just one organization. So that's the high level view. I'm happy to be your point of contact for any programmatic or technical questions. And my email's there. Feel free to reach out to me. If you have any questions about the grants kind of technical application process or forms that are needed, we have some other contacts at NICE that can help you there, but I'm happy to put you in touch with them as well. So that's really it. Here's some links here, and I'm sure everyone will get the slides. And feel free to reach back out with any questions, but I'm happy to take some now if there are any.
I didn't see any in the chat, but I did put the link to the site for the RAMPS information, so they can do that, and also for CyberSeek. Janet put that out there, and so did I. So, any questions?
I have a question.
Okay,
since this is meant to be like a multi-stakeholder type of initiative that this would be funding, is it expected that the multiple stakeholders are already in partnership? Should they be applying together somehow? How would we reflect that in the application?
So they don't need to be already partnered up. They can be, these partnerships will be established after we get the grant, but we do need letters of commitments from those 2 partners. So at least a plan in place of how you will partner if you were to get the grant.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, Daniela. This was very informative. And okay, we're gonna turn it over to Karen and Michael, and they're gonna talk about the NICE framework, the new version and the components.
Before we move on, Stephen, can I ask one more question to Danielle? When did you say the recording will be available, Danielle, or is it already available?
It's not available yet. It should be any day here. So I'm hoping before mid next week it'll be online.
Okay, and it would be on the RAMPS page, or?
Yeah, we have a specific event page. You can get to it through the RAMPS page, but I can also send the direct link into the chat right now.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to turn it over to Karen and Mike. You're muted, Karen.
There we go. Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here and share a little bit more about what NICE is doing. I'm Karen Wetzel. I'm lead of the NICE Framework, and I'm joined here with my colleague, Mike Prebil. And we're going to be talking about a recent release that we had with the NICE Framework. So you all might be familiar with the Workforce Framework for Cybersecurity, the NICE Framework, really as a tool for helping to develop out the cybersecurity workforce with planning around that as well. And at the beginning of March, we were able to come out with an update to our NICE Framework components. With our framework, really our framework is comprised of the 800-181 publication, which describes the structure of the framework, the pieces that are part of it. We also have a report on NICE Framework competency areas, which were introduced with our 2020 revision of that 800-181 document. But these components is what was pulled out of those. So before they had lived in a static PDF environment, we pulled them out so that we can have them be more responsive to change. And that's what I'll be talking a little bit about today. But essentially, the NICE framework is a common language to help describe what workforce needs to know about cybersecurity work. It does that via a modular building blocks approach that's based on task knowledge and skill statements, which then in turn define work roles and competency areas. And it's used in all sorts of different areas across all sorts of different applications, such as career discovery, education and training, workforce planning and assessment, and hiring and career development, to name a few. You'll see at the bottom what came out with our components update. It's a spreadsheet, essentially. It's available both in Excel and JSON, a machine readable JSON format. But what we did was we took this opportunity with our revised 881 to make some changes to the content that most people really think of as a NICE framework. We've updated our work role categories and work roles. We have now the 11 new competency areas, and we updated all of our TKS statements. And so that's what we'll be talking a little bit more about today. I'll be doing more of the overview parts, and then I'll hand it off to Mike to get a little bit more detailed about those. But just to emphasize why we're doing this, it's really the NICE framework is meant to work with all of the players of this ecosystem, of the cybersecurity ecosystem, very much similar to what Danielle was sharing with RAMPS, wanting to bring together multiple stakeholders. That's what the NICE framework does as well. It engages all of the different people who play in this environment into a place and having a single common language. And by doing so, we are able to enable some activities, with employers. They're using the framework to have that common language that helps them to broaden the pipeline and increase diversity by focusing on skills-based hiring, for example. They're also using it to create job descriptions and to assess candidate skills in that way, making it so that they're using that language that's going to be familiar to people who are applying for those jobs and being able to make those connections more easily. They're using it for tracking and planning workforce capabilities, making sure that they have the people that they need in order to achieve the goals they're looking for, their cybersecurity goals. And it's also really important nowadays that we're looking at developing employees, whether that's upskilling or reskilling, but it's about making sure that we're able to retain the good staff that we do have, as well as bring in people into this field who may have those capabilities or that interest in cybersecurity, but aren't in there right now, to help develop them so we can make sure that we aren't losing people. The learners, and we say learners to describe not only students, but also people who are looking for jobs or may already be employed, because it's really a recognition of that ongoing learning that's necessary in this environment. They're using the NICE framework for discovery, understanding what kinds of work roles there are, understanding that it is an interdisciplinary, as we heard at the beginning of this, the focus on interdisciplinary uses of this cybersecurity is really important. It's as I think was mentioned, in the healthcare industry, we're talking about in telecom or in critical infrastructures. So understanding that there's lots of different places where cybersecurity can be a component of your job, and giving learners that aspect that gives them a sense of what knowledge and skills they may need to develop and the kinds of work that they would be doing so they can demonstrate that capability. And then educators, you all will know this, of course, can use the NICE framework to either develop learning courses or programs, or to map existing content to the NICE framework to really be more transparent to both learners and employers about the work that you're providing, the education that you're providing, so that they can actually have those connections through to be able to make those ties between those learners and the employers. And it's important in using it for performance-based assessment, sort of that hands-on learning that a lot of times people are looking for. Importantly, the NICE framework is also used broadly. It's used in government, industry, academia, internationally. And so that's my big plug for the framework. Going back to the components then, this is a bigger picture of that one I had on that earlier slide of what the component release is. So this is we're calling this version 1 because it's the first time we're putting this out as its own sort of separate spreadsheet where we're going to be maintaining versions. It also gives us an opportunity to continue to develop the framework. So this was really more of a cleanup more than anything else. It was an opportunity for us to take a look at what we had and structure it so that it would be more useful and easier to apply. And that includes our work roles, our competency areas, and those TKS statements. Oops, sorry. And then so looking at these, you'll see that with our work roles, we do still have 7 work roles. They're slightly different if you were familiar with the previous ones. The first 4, the oversight, governance, design and development, implementation and operation, and protection and defense, are ones that most people will be familiar with in both public and private industries. The last 3 are more specific to government applications. These new competency areas are a way for us to extend the NICE framework, for us to be able to address content areas that maybe aren't neatly defined as work roles. So it may be an emerging technology area that isn't yet defined across many different industries as a work role but we want to make sure it's out there for people who are starting to look in that direction. There are ones where it may be a pull from multiple work roles. There are ones that are more just looking at different kinds of capabilities that could be added on to existing work roles, so used in conjunction with existing work roles. We are in the process of looking at developing these out. This release included the competency area names and their descriptions, but we are now working on developing out knowledge and skill statements to support those areas. And so if you all have expertise in any of those areas and would be interested in helping us, we'd love to engage with you. We also, with this release, have over 2,000 updated task knowledge and skill statements. And I'm not going to speak more about that now because Mike, I'm sure, will be. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Karen. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. And thanks again, Mike and Stephen, for inviting us. It's great to be here with you all. I'm just going to give a quick walkthrough of the version 1.0.0. I'll just call it version 1 components. I'm going to pause at 1 or 2 points in the presentation for questions. If you prefer, of course, feel free to drop them in the chat as they come to mind. Karen gave sort of the general sense. She gave actually quite a good bit of detail there about sort of why these updates are coming out. The 2 big aims, of course, behind these updates, as Karen articulated. First, just to support the NICE framework's relevance across all of its different users groups, we want to make sure that we're keeping up with the pace of business and education. And second, of course, to improve the cohesiveness and the usability of the NICE framework for those same groups of users. And as we walk through this, hopefully you'll see those intentions reflected in the work that we've done. The result have been some pretty big changes. Karen, again, it is really kind of a cleanup, but there also are some pretty substantive changes that you should know about to the NICE framework's contents, and we'll hope to give a good overview of that here. We're going to go relatively in depth here, since many of you are probably already pretty familiar with the broad strokes of the NICE framework and how it works. So you can see up here just a couple of the changes that are rolled into what we've done with the new components release. And just to recap, again, on what Karen said about what the components are, they are the specific elements that exist under each element type in the NICE framework. The structure is laid out in SP 800-181 revision 1. That's the first element on this slide here. That was published November 2020. The new components basically catch up the elements that make up that element set in the November 2020 framework. Those had not been updated for a while, so these changes kind of roll up a series of updates going back to that release. This is the list. You can see all the things that sort of go into it. There are 6 different sets of changes you can see here. Don't need to get bogged down too much in these details. You'll see what all of these kind of mean as we work through this part of the presentation. Go to the next slide, Karen. So what you've noticed if you looked at the old NICE framework components, so the old 2017 spreadsheet, you saw that it included, for example, specialty areas and ability statements, both of which were deprecated in November 2020 and removed from the NICE framework structure. The new components release, so version 1, basically brings that spreadsheet up to speed, as I said, with those structural changes and a number of the other updates that we made in the intervening years. You can see basically the top line here, specialty areas, ability statements are gone. Ability statements have been refactored into task knowledge and skill statements. Specialty areas have no counterpart in version 1. They just go away. Those extra 2 columns that you see in the top image, for example, sorry, it's a little bit small here. But the extra column there that you see in the top image basically just disappears. And so there is no sort of intermediate category between work role categories and work roles themselves in the hierarchy of the NICE framework. And abilities, again, get kind of rolled into other things. If you could go to the next slide. Within that structure that is now updated, you can see there are some common changes to elements of the NICE framework. So updated names, for example, in work role categories, the securely provisioned category has been renamed to design and development. Updated identifiers, so the SP abbreviation for securely provisioned is replaced with DD. And then updated descriptions. So basically the text string that describes every element of the NICE framework. In most cases, those have been updated as well. We can kind of talk about if people have questions about specific ones, we can kind of look at those in a little more depth. Okay. Actually, I think I might as well just pause for questions here. This is a good sort of stopping spot. Does anybody have any sort of just questions about any of the things we've gone over so far, about the sort of history of changes, the versions, anything like that?
There may be wanting to know how to get to the spreadsheet itself.
Yes, absolutely. So everything that you need to know about the NICE framework is on the NICE Framework Resource Center. And the spreadsheet itself is contained on a page that's titled Current Versions. You'll find that on the vertical menu on the left. I think somebody can, there you go. Yep, so it's on the NICE Framework Resource Center there. And I'll talk in a moment just about the different kind of formats that you'll see out there. As Karen mentioned, JSON, Excel, those are the two ways that you'll see the NICE framework exist for now. Those may see more formats in the future. Feel free to drop, I got the chat up here, so feel free to drop questions in the chat. Karen, you can go to the next slide just to keep it moving. So as you're probably seeing, what all this means is that most of the elements of the NICE framework have changed in some way. I think you see that nowhere more prominently than with task, knowledge, and skill statements. When it's all said and done, only about 6% of TKS statements are more or less exactly the same now as they were before. So it's a pretty complete revision of the NICE framework's elements, and you can see that here, just kind of a breakdown of how it looks in the realm of TKS statements. I'll say a little more in a minute too about what the difference between retained, withdrawn, new means. Rather small number of retained statements. Of course, that means that statements have kept their same ID. Even then, descriptions have often changed for those retained statements, albeit in smaller ways. So removing periods, parentheticals, some kind of formatting, things like that. Again, big takeaway here is that most things in the NICE framework are changed in some way. And I'm going to talk in a minute again about those data formats that will help you see how those changes are reflected. And then second to last slide, I think. You can click, Karen. Thank you. So this is a last slide just on, second to last slide on content changes to task, knowledge, and skill statements. This is a little bit granular, but we thought it was important to provide a bit more detail about what's happened with TKS statements, which, as Karen said, are kind of the building blocks of the NICE framework. And we're a huge area of activity for us, just wrapping up these changes that have occurred over the past 4 years. You can see these are 3 sort of general types of changes that have occurred. So on the far left there, you can see a one-to-one change, which is S0012, basically just turning into S0557. So S0012 is skill in conducting knowledge mapping. It changes to skill in creating knowledge maps. So a relatively small change there, and it's just one-to-one. The same TKS statement basically turns into, is sort of edited a little bit, and it receives a new identifier. On the middle column there, you can see a one-to-many change, and there are a number of these, actually quite a good number of these too in the components updates. K0506 turns into 3 different task, knowledge, and skill statements. And in fact, they're of a different type than the original. So it's 1 knowledge statement turns into 3, so 1 skill statement, then 2 task statements. And in this case, as with the first column there, the initial statement is withdrawn. Then the sort of inheritor statements, the 3 statements that are sort of produced, become part of the NICE framework version 1.1 components. The last thing that you'll see are just straight removals. So in this case, the statement is withdrawn completely. It has no replacement. And that's the case with T0306. The statement basically just goes away. You won't see it in the new framework. And we do, and this is what we'll get into with this last slide just on formats. You can see all of these, you won't see all these changes in the sort of main reference spreadsheet. So basically the current version of the NICE Framework, version 1.0.0, is just what exists right now. But we do have on that same page a set of mapping sheets, which will show basically the changes from 2017 to version 1. Karen, you can go to the last slide. Okay, and so here's our last slide, just before I kick it back to Karen. This is just about the formats that we mentioned. The components live in two different formats as of right now: Excel spreadsheets and then JSON files. Excel spreadsheets, probably best for most of us. These might be what you're a little more familiar with already. Best for us browsing as humans, just kind of getting to know the NICE framework, how to use it, what it contains, what its different elements are. The version that you'll see on the website, again, the current version that I mentioned will be very familiar if you've used the 2017 spreadsheet. It looks very much the same, but just reflecting the new material. The mapping sheets are, of course, a little bit different. So those will basically show the kind of articulation from 2017 to version 1. JSON files, a better fit for those of you who already have, who are using the NICE framework in applications. So if you've got a web application, software, anything else, an ERM or something else that you're using the NICE framework for, JSON is probably the easiest way for you to basically upload the new NICE framework if you're using it, or to make those maps between 2017 and version 1 if you've already got an implementation that uses the NICE framework. And again, both of these formats are available on the NICE Framework Resource Center. As continued updates are made to these, to the NICE Framework components, of course, they will be reflected in those publications. And I think Karen will probably mention this too before we close. If you have any questions about use of the NICE Framework or any problems you're running into, any suggestions for us as a team, please bring those to us. niceframework@nis.gov is an email that'll go to me and Karen. We'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. And we're really excited to hear your feedback, your input, your ideas for how to make these resources better. So I'll turn to Karen for our last few slides.
Thanks, Mike. And just to, I know we've talked about the NICE Framework Resource Center, just to tell you a little bit about what's up there. We did actually make a number of changes there to try to make it so you have it, what you need if you're looking for our content. Mike mentioned our current versions page that has all sorts of information on it in those downloadable spreadsheets. We have a getting started with the NICE framework. There's information on the NICE framework history of our changes and change logs that includes a summary of all these changes in a nice readable format. We also have mappings of the earlier 2017 content to this current version as well. We also have information about revisions. So what types of revisions we expect to be seeing going forward, how frequently we might release those, and how we will number those. And then there's some change request FAQ. So if you do have ideas about other things that need to be adjusted or new content that should be added in there, there's some information on how to make sure that those change requests in. It's pretty informal process, but if you've got a question, there's the answers there, and then just some general and NICE Framework FAQ. But we intend to add more. Now that we've put this out, we're going forward. This isn't a pausing. This is now we're going down the fast part. So that's going to be creating new content. It's going to be looking at guidance. We're going to be making sure this is available in CTDL format, for example. We're going to be putting up information about best practices on how to map your content to the NICE framework if that's of interest to you. And other kinds of resources like for small, medium-sized businesses, for different academic kinds of programs and applications. So it's really looking at how can we now support use of this as well as grow it. And so there are a lot of ways for you to get involved, and you can get to all this from, you can see there's a link at the bottom of this. So when you get the slides, you can get to how to join in on all of these. So we have, of course, the direct emails, but we also have nice working groups that talk about different kinds of areas. So for instance, our group about modernizing talent management, one that's looking at learning, one that's looking at, we have a community of interest that's focusing on apprenticeships. So there's a lot of different kinds of groups out there that you could engage with. And it's either, you can be there and be very active, or you could be there and listen in. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you might want to join. We also, if you really want to dive deep into the NICE framework and get involved in helping support it, we have a NICE framework users group, and that's a great place to share about your use of it, questions that you might have, struggles you might have, suggestions for changes, and reach out to others who are using it as well. We have a number of events and workshops, including webinars on a monthly basis. We have all sorts of additional NICE publications, for instance, ones that are looking at how to create job descriptions using the NICE framework, for example. There's one that's around career pathways. And then, of course, that direct feedback, those email addresses. There is some information here, too, about our next event, which will be our annual conference in Dallas, Texas, and that's going to be held at the beginning of June. Hope you all can be there if you can. Love to be able to see you and meet up with you there. We'd really just want to hear what your interest areas are, how we can support those. Some of the things coming forward include, as I mentioned before, creating out those competency areas. We've already had one meeting around the very first of those. That's on cyber resiliency. We're now starting to look at the next one, focusing on AI security. We're also looking at, right now, we're starting work on reviewing some of our existing work roles to make sure that they're still pertinent. And we're looking to do that with others. In addition, we're looking at creating new work roles, for instance, in product security, secure software engineering. There are a number of those there. So if you have one that a wish list that you would like to add to our list, we'd love to hear that. And even better, if you have some interest in helping us to develop these, that's what we're looking for as well, because NIST is not necessarily, NICE isn't going to be saying this is what you should do. We're going to be saying this is what employers are telling us they're looking for. This is what academia is telling us that they're starting to hear that they need to develop out content for. And that's what we want to make sure is represented in the NICE framework. So that's it for me. If there are any questions, happy to answer them.
So you can unmute if you want and ask a question, or put it in the chat, either way. I had one maybe question and comment, and as you know, as CAE schools, we align to the NICE work roles, and so in academia, changes from one version to another, and it's not just with the NICE. We have to deal with all these different standards and guidelines. Yeah. So we have. Are there any official initiatives going on where like we're realigning? Where they have some work, maybe ACM would be a good example, where they actually take and develop curriculum and update their changes for their different degree programs.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it was a point I meant to raise and didn't, is that so now that we have this new updated version of our components out, we're having lots of conversations with people who have aligned to it in the past or have used it in tools like CyberSeek or others. And so making sure that they're making updates to catch up as well. So those are things that are happening now. So this is, we've gotten this out, but that's just again, sort of the beginning of it all, the tip of the iceberg, as now all those people who use the framework are now going to be updating. We, though, by moving in this direction, we're hoping that any future changes aren't going to be as disruptive, that by having these machine readable formats, by developing out these relationships that we have with people who are heavy users of it, and developing more guidance, that's not going to be as disruptive. And any changes that we are anticipating for this year are really meant to be more additive than anything else. So again, not going to be saying like, oh, you can't use this work role anymore, because those work roles are sort of stable. The statements under them might shift a little bit, but the roles themselves are a little bit more stable. Whereas we might add new work roles, which would be just an additive versus all of a sudden insider threats out, or so that would break things. We're trying not to do that, to really understand, how can we support usage of this and not actually cause additional difficulties.
Thank you for that. Any questions? Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, we have a little bit of, I know, when I've had some questions come back from some industry, from our industry advisory committee about, well, do the work roles align with ONET and some of those? And of course they do. I mean, even in the tool, that the NICS has. You can go and find those in there, but so I just want to make that comment. They do align with ONET and other. I think I think there's a similar work roles with the DoD's new work role framework. You want to maybe mention that, Karen? Or
Sure. So when it comes to, as you correctly point out with ONET, there is definitely a relationship there. So there is alignment. And just as with the other kind of areas that we are looking at increasing alignment in those areas. So trying to make it so that there are greater relationships between a lot of these data systems or data resources that you all might need. So as you're looking at ONET, or if you're looking at the OC codes or whatever, that there's a greater relationship there. We are also, you also mentioned, I think, NICS, and so of course their tools are being updated, and we're working with them because they have a training and education catalog that is aligned to the framework, but it's aligned at the specialty area level, which has been deprecated. And so we're providing guidance and working with them to provide guidance on how to update those mappings to the work roles and the competency area levels. And then when you mentioned the DoD, so yes, DoD has the DoD Cyber Workforce Framework, or DCWF, and we have a very close relationship between those two. They essentially started from the same place. There is some difference, obviously they've made adjustments specific for DoD application. If you go back and take a look at the slide that shows the work role categories, those bottom 3 work role or categories, 2 of those are really more DoD. And so we defer to them and how those are developed and basically sort of match. And those are the cyber effects, and the other, I'm blanking on the other one. But so those are really more DoD, again, what's being used in military applications and what's used in covert actions. So, and then they've also recently added in some new content. They've started to extend a little bit. Our focus is cybersecurity, and they're starting to extend a little bit more beyond that. So they, I think it was last year, added in some AI and data roles. We are looking at integrating AI into our framework in a slightly different way. We're looking at it through the competency area, which I mentioned, which is going to be focusing on the security of AI, but we're also looking at our existing work roles and how AI will be impacting those. And so whereas DoD's approach has been to take, for instance, they have an AI testing specialist role. We have an existing NICE framework testing and evaluation work role. And so rather than creating a separate one for AI, we're looking at integrating AI task knowledge and skill statements into that existing work role. So that's how our approaches are slightly different, but we'll be leveraging what they've done. Luckily, there's some work there that we can take on, don't have to reinvent the wheel. And we have been in a lot of conversations with them to make sure that we're coordinating. I know that there's work as well with the AI around with the CAE efforts. And so we're also staying involved in those as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, if you don't have any questions, we're going to let everyone off a little bit early, but I'm going to turn it back over to Mike in just a minute. But we want to thank Daniela and Karen and Mike for this great information. And Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap up.
Thanks, Stephen. So I dropped a link in the chat. Our evaluator would love to hear from you guys. Let us know how we're doing. And just to remind you too that this recording, the presentations, I've already uploaded one presentation. I'll get the other one up there in a minute, but they're all going to be available on the NCyTE website. And if you're not familiar with how that looks out there, I'll share the screen. Where's my share? Here's where everything's going to be, where we're saving everything. So we have the links already out there. Can you see this? Sorry.
No, we don't see it.
Well, I'll send you the link for that. I'm not sure what's going on with my site. But to echo what Stephen was saying, thank you again for being here today. It was a great presentation. Thanks, Mike, Karen, Danielle, and thank you all for taking your time out today. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting in May.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Stephen. And thanks everyone for having us today.
Thank you.
Bye.